My name is Sarah Chitty. I work for U&I, we're a property developer, and my role is Senior Development Manager. So my role involves kind of coordinating the design team who are part of the Preston Barracks Master Plan project.
Lovely.
Involves securing planning for a brownfield site known as Preston Barracks. So I coordinate the design team. Post-planning, my role is to get funding to go out and build the proposed development or to secure funding partners, and then see it through to completion, whether that be also securing pre-lets for office space or lettings for retail space and sales of the resi and the student accommodation.
Cool.
So I get to see a project through from very beginning to very end.
Yeah,
which is
see
the
it
best
come
part
out
of
the
my
ground,
job.
yeah, lovely.
Yeah. I mean, it's probably at the absolute kind of heart of our core values. We're about making sure that there's social, economic and sustainable kind of change for places, and ensuring that we're kind of creating places where people do want to come, live, visit, play, work, learn, are really important to us. So it's a kind of a social value, but there's also commercial value to it. So if you're designing homes which have brilliant outdoor spaces for residents to come and meet and greet their neighbours, then you're likely to reduce letting voids if you're letting that space. So that means that there's a commercial benefit to you because you haven't got loads of kind of void costs. So actually kind of social value and commercial value go hand in hand. So making sure that we create amazing places hasn't just got social benefit, but it's a commercial benefit to us as well. We generally do major mixed-use regeneration projects, so we like opportunities that allow us to create mixed-use places because they are kind of a bit more recession-proof. So if the resi market is failing, then at least we've got commercial or retail or student accommodation to kind of prop ourselves up. So we like mixed use. We also think mixed use creates better places because you generally have 24/7 activity because you've got the activity from residents and the AM and PM peaks, and during the daytime we've got office people, so the site's always active, which makes for good placemaking. And generally we look for a minimum return on our equity as well. Usually we ask for at least a 2 times multiple return on what we put in. So
on the investment?
Yeah, so if we're putting in 5 million, we want to get out.
You want to get out 10? Yeah,
at least. The architects are our biggest kind of commission, I guess. And usually at the beginning of the process we'll run a design competition where we'll get a few architects in to present their ideas for a site, and then we'll pick the one that we like the best. We were actually working with the 2 architects who are on this before we even went through the planning process. So when we were discussing with the university back in, I think it was 2015.
Back in about a 3-year planning process.
Yeah, it had been a long time. We were already using two of our own architects to come up with some initial ideas, and we actually just carried on using those architects. So it was a bit of a different situation on this one, but generally we like to hold kind of design competitions to make sure that we're selecting the right people for the scheme. So there's lots of kind of sustainability standards that we have to meet anyway through the planning process. So for example, on some of the office buildings we have to meet certain, it's called BREEAM, it's a sustainability standard, and it's good, very good, excellent, outstanding. And you can do certain things to the building to make it sustainable, like put lots of solar panels on the roof, or make sure you're doing like grey water recycling, which is recycling kind of used toilet water, and lots of other ways of kind of making the building sustainable. Build it so that the aspect of the building is such that you're reducing how much kind of mechanical engineering you need to put into the building to keep it warm. So all these sort of things can come out through the design. So that's kind of one way. During the construction process, Usually we try and source materials from the UK as opposed to going abroad for things, so that they're travelling less far distance. We try and recycle where we can. So we had lots of demolition on Preston Barracks. Some of the buildings that we had some interesting features inside, so we've taken some of those and we can recycle them in some of the to be used in some of the buildings. And also any kind of crush that we get from demolition can be used for pile mats. So when we're doing our piling for the foundations, we can use the crush from the demolished buildings.
Yeah, I've actually seen that happen with the machines that they use. The buildings that they demolish, they literally crush it and just lay that out for the foundations.
Yeah, so it's kind of all reusable. And we do what we can to recycle materials, but the big one probably is trying to, make sure that we're using materials from UK or Europe and not having to go all the way to China for, granite or whatever, to try and reduce our kind of carbon footprint. Planners are particularly keen on making sure that the places coming forward now are of kind of exemplary sustainability standards, and businesses are moving much more towards wanting to be as sustainable as possible.
Of course.
We're all concerned about the planet these days.
Yeah,
we've got
absolutely.
our part to play.
Yeah.
So I think that's, and sustainability doesn't just come in kind of environmental form. It's about making sure places are economically sustainable. So on Preston Barracks we're building a co-working facility which will encourage small businesses and startups to grow.
The new business school?
It's not the new business school. So on Preston Barracks it's going to be a private building, so it's not owned by the university, it'll be owned by you and I. It's going to be a co-working space for small businesses and startups in Brighton, and we'll have our own kind of mentors who can help those businesses develop their business plans. Perhaps if you're a business that makes a product, we can link you in with manufacturers. So it's trying to help accelerate the growth of small businesses, and that in itself is about economic sustainability.
Of course.
Especially in this part of Brighton. So Moulscombe used to have a massive a massive business called Allen West, and they produced electrical cabling. It used to be where Mithras House is now.
Oh, really?
And they used to employ over 6,000 people in the local area, and they were a huge kind of economic contributor to the local area. And when that shut down, the area started to decline. So this building that we're building on Preston Barracks is about trying to kind of restart that kind of economic sustainability which in this part of the city, and Moulscombe is actually quite a relatively poor part of the city. I think it's considered to be in the top 5% of the most socially deprived parts of the UK.
Really?
So that kind of kickstart to the economy is really important, and things kind of as a catalyst for other good things.
It's like the domino effect.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Way that we kind of showcase our developments at an early kind of planning stage is you'd have an open exhibition where you'd have boards and they'd have plans on and they'd have pictures, but increasingly the development world is moving towards things like virtual reality, where you can put on a headset and walk down a street that might be created, or have a look around, or we use them in marketing suites where you want to see what your apartment might feel like in the future. So it's quite a good way of getting people to understand spaces. But I think there's not that tangibility. I think if in a marketing suite we might still need to create a marketing suite because people want to come and feel what the carpet's going to be like, and the texture of whereas on a kind of virtual reality that we don't get that kind of feel the textures and the colours coming through, I guess. So there's definitely a place for it, and it's being increasingly used in public consultation. I think we're probably behind the curve a little bit because we're quite, as an industry, we're probably a bit slow moving and old fashioned.
More bricks and mortar.
Yeah, I think so. And I think we could do a lot more to kind of bring development into like the 21st century. We were talking yesterday about, buying land in virtual worlds. If you've seen Ready Player One, where
where it's all in the virtual room.
You could buy a bit of virtual land and put you and I cranes up in it, or have a U&I building and let people go into those buildings to see what they're like, and whether there would be, you know, value in doing something like that, because it helps with our branding, our marketing, and starts to create a you know, a feel for what a U&I development might be like, so that the person in that game might be like, well, I actually want to buy one in the real world. So we were just having a discussion about it yesterday as to whether that's the sort of world we should be moving towards, because, you know, our competitors these days aren't just other developers, they're people like Google and Apple and everyone else who's got a, you know, a stake in some sort of real estate. So we need to be keeping up with them. Our architects are starting to use BIM and CAD, which is a form of architectural 3D modelling as opposed to just drawing 2D drawings. And that's where you can see if there are going to be clashes. You know, when we're designing up, you know, pipe work in a building, you can more easily see in a model how that's all going to be integrated, and whether there might be clashes between structure and a pipe. You can see it much more easily on a 3D model than you can on a plan. So it helps to improve the design process, helps us to challenge ourselves a bit more, because, you know, you can see that level of detail, and it's being increasingly used by developers and architects and contractors, and actually I think the public sector are asking for architects and developers to design in BIM 3D.
Yeah, 360 glue,
yeah. So it's actually it's the way that the world is moving. Usually, someone who's maybe a funder who's investing in an office will want to understand what kind of rents that office can achieve, what kind of yield assumptions you're making. They'll want to see the financials behind it all to understand what that investment looks like. So we generally have to go out, do some research, find some comparable rents, speak to agents to see what kind of investment yields we should be assuming. So you have to demonstrate it from a kind of financial perspective. I mean, the office market is also about, you know, making sure that the actual environment that people are investing into is high quality. You know, our office is the front door of U&I. This is our kind of our outward facing brand. When people come in here, they get a sense of who we are. So office spaces are really important to make sure you get the design right. So I guess that's kind of an example from the kind of office environment. JV, joint ventures, you take many different kind of forms and structures. Generally it starts with presenting a really solid scheme, well designed, well thought out, in a market which is sustainable. Mixed use is always good because, as I said at the beginning, if one use is you know, perhaps not performing too well, you've got the backup of, you know, lots of other uses on site to kind of underwrite the value a little bit. Probably the planning system, it's quite slow. I mean, as an example, you know, you could go through a full property cycle by the time you've even got planning. So you might have planned your development from day one, assuming that, you know, in a year's time we'll have planning, we'll be on site then, we'll sell then, and that's all working with the current property cycle, which is kind of linked to the business cycle. But if you're delayed in planning, things push out a year, Brexit happens, you know, contractors are suddenly upping their prices, people aren't buying, it shifts your whole financial model for your development. So it's really important that the planning system becomes much more efficient, so that you hit the timescales and you have more certainty that you can actually deliver what you want to deliver. And that's, I mean, Brighton Council have been really great, but they, you know, generally councils are very under-resourced, especially in the planning department. There's a lot more kind of loopholes we have to go through. There's a lot more kind of rigour to planning applications, which is good because we want to make sure that we've designed amazing places. But it does slow the process down, and it does have an impact on actually being able to physically get on site and deliver.
Get the
and it's inherently political as well.
I'm sure, yeah.
It's you know, it's schemes get thrown around just to act as a political football more than anything. So you could have spent a year designing the most beautiful scheme, really well thought out, every little detail is really well considered, but then there's an election coming up and people are using it as a way to either, to get elected or stay. Currently I don't work alongside or collaborate with immersive agencies, although I think the intention is to do it on a project that I'm currently working on down in South East London. We would like to do it for our next public consultation, so to introduce virtual reality element to our public consultation.
And that is to showcase kind of...
so specifically on that example we want to showcase the quality of the public realm that we're designing. So we're designing a new street and we want to showcase what the look and feel of that street's going to be like, how well activated it will be with cafes and kind of office space, and to give people a flavour for what that new place could look and feel like. And virtual reality is quite a nice way of doing that.
Awesome.
Generally we use BIM as the kind of the main model. We've been starting to use there's things like there's a program called Citty, which architects are starting to use, which is essentially a whole kind of 3D model of London, and every developer contributes by dropping their building in, so you can start to see what London will look like as a kind of a cumulative whole, I guess. So when we're trying to see what our buildings will look like from key views, we can kind of almost spin around London and look at what our development will look like in the context of other developments popping up. So we use that kind of modelling to make sure that we've got the architecture right and it's sitting well within views. Our architects also, we use 3D modelling to make sure that the internal spaces of the buildings also feel right, and we understand what we're actually getting as clients, I guess, at the end of the day, if we're being handed a building.
Of course, yeah.
So, but City is actually a really useful tool for us, particularly in London where there's lots of protected views. So you've got some very sensitive views because of the history that you've got here. So you've got to make sure that when you're designing tall buildings in particular,
you're taking the geology of...
you're taking in the geology of the landscape, you're taking in, St Paul's Cathedral, you're not going to block any key views of that, or Buckingham Palace or whatever. And if you're designing tall buildings, they've got to be of exemplary architectural standards, they've got to be the most kind of elegant and high quality architecture you can produce. I completely see kind of these immersive technologies becoming more mainstream in the future. I think we do more and more in the virtual world now, so we as an industry have to be brought into that. People are a lot more open to kind of engaging with things like virtual reality. So definitely, I think it probably is the future for kind of the property world.
This immersive application called VX, which allows designers and clients and company stakeholders to view the whole design process in virtual reality from different locations in the world. So they all come to this virtual space whether they're in China or London or at home in their office, if they've got the tools to do that. Do you see that being beneficial within the AEC industries?
I completely see that kind of platform of kind of bringing different stakeholders together being useful, because as an example, I'm working on a project in Dublin at the moment. So we have a team in Dublin, we've got an architect based in Rotterdam, we've got an architect in London, and we might have an investor in the States. And we have to move quickly to get planning, to get our development on site. But when you've got stakeholders in all corners of the world, it's quite a challenge. So if we had the technology and the platform to bring people together in a way that's really slick, which I don't think we have at the moment. So we use like Zoom conference calls, and people cut out, and you can't really show plans as easily as you could if everyone was in a room. But if there was a really slick piece of technology which would enable all of those stakeholders to come together and have a design team meeting essentially wherever they are in the world, but still feel like a team, that would be hugely beneficial, because it also means you're getting the best of the best talent. We're not constrained to just using British architects. We want to use architects from Holland or architects from wherever. We want to use funders who are in different countries. I think that would be hugely beneficial to our industry.